turning the sky the color of rusted copper and old blood, as the desert stretched wide and unforgiving. With no mercy for the weak or the lost, this was wild country where the law arrived late and left early and where silence carried more weight than words. The wind rolled across the plains, whispering through dry grass and broken fences, telling stories of men who vanished and women who learned too quickly how to survive. Out here, fate did not knock politely. It kicked down the door and waited to see who would stand. The town of Red Hollow sat crooked against the edge of nowhere, its buildings leaning like tired men after a long fight. Wooden porches creaked beneath the boots of drifters and gamblers, while the saloon breathed out smoke and regret with every swing of its doors. Horses stood tied in the dust, their eyes dull as if they too had seen too much of this land. The mine outside town loomed like an open wound carved into the hills, a place everyone avoided and everyone feared because too many souls had gone down and never come back. She arrived in Red Hollow just before nightfall, riding alone with the sun at her back. Dust clung to her coat, and her eyes carried the look of someone running from more than distance. People noticed her but did not greet her. In the Old West, strangers were questions no one wanted answered. She dismounted slow and careful, every movement measured as if she expected trouble to rise. From the ground itself, her boots hit the dirt and the town seemed to hold its breath. No one knew her name yet, but they would remember her face, pale from travel, marked by resolve, sharpened by loss. She was not dressed for comfort or vanity, but for survival, and that alone earned quiet respect in a place like this. She glanced toward the mine far off against the hills, and her hand tightened for a moment as if some memory had already reached out to claim her. The mine watched back, dark and patient like it always did. Across the street, the rancher stood leaning against a post near the livery stable. He was a tall man with shoulders shaped by years of work and a face carved by sun and wind. He did not speak much, and when he did, people leaned in because his words were rare and carried truth. He had seen her arrive, and unlike the others, he did not look away. His eyes followed her, not with hunger or suspicion, but with something quieter. Recognition, perhaps, or warning. The rancher had lived most of his life in the spaces between things, between towns and seasons. Between violence and peace, he had buried friends and enemies with the same steady hands and learned long ago that the land never chose sides. It simply watched. He knew the sound of a storm before the clouds formed, and he knew trouble when it rode into town on tired horses and determined eyes. When he saw her, he felt that old weight settle into his chest, the kind that meant nothing would be the same by morning. Night came fast, as it always did out here. Lanterns flickered to life, casting long shadows that twisted across the street like restless spirits. The saloon grew louder, but the sound felt hollow against the vast silence beyond the town limits. Somewhere far off, metal groaned deep within the mine, a sound carried by the wind like a warning no one wanted to hear. The woman stood near the boarding house, now staring at the door as if deciding whether to enter or keep moving until the land swallowed her whole. The rancher finally moved his boots slow in the dust. His presence was calm but unmistakable, like a mountain choosing to walk. He stopped a short distance from her, close enough to be seen, but far enough to give space. He tipped his hat, not in greeting but acknowledgement. She looked at him, then really looked, and something in her expression softened, not relief but understanding. Two people shaped by the same harsh world, recognizing the weight in each other. No words passed between them. The frontier had no need for them tonight. Around them, Red Hollow carried on, unaware that fate had shifted its footing. The mine waited, patient and dark. The land listened as it always did, recording every step, every breath, every choice that would soon echo louder than gunfire. This was how stories began in the Old West, not with glory or speeches, but with quiet arrivals and the heavy sense that the darkness was already moving toward the light. Morning came to Red Hollow, slow and pale, the sun climbing over the hills like an old man rising from a hard bed. The town stirred with reluctant movement, doors opening, boots scraping wood and dust drifting through the air like a memory that refused to settle. The woman woke in the boarding house with her hand already clenched around the edge of the bed, her body tense, as if sleep had offered no rest. She rose before the others, pulling on her coat and stepping outside where the cool air carried the smell of iron and dry earth. Across the street, the rancher was already awake, tending to his horse with quiet care. He brushed the animal slow and steady, the way a man does when he has learned patience from long years alone. He did not look up at first, but he knew she was there. He always knew when someone entered his space, the land taught him that much. The woman watched him for a moment, measuring him the way one measures a river. Before crossing it was not strength alone she saw, but restraint, and that mattered more out here. Red Hollow looked different in daylight, less mysterious, but no less dangerous. The mine cut into the hills like a scar that refused to heal. Even from town it pulled at the eye, daring anyone foolish enough to come closer. Men spoke of it in low voices, claiming it was empty or cursed depending on how much whiskey they had swallowed. Yet every man knew it still breathed, still waited. The woman followed the line of the hills with her gaze, and felt that familiar tightening in her chest, like fate drawing near. She walked toward the well, lowering the bucket into darkness, and listening to the echo as it touched water. The sound reminded her too much of the mine shaft, and she pulled it up, quick, spilling water onto the ground. She steadied herself and drank, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her reflection in the surface showed a face hardened by travel and loss, but there was fire there too, the kind that refused to die even when buried. The rancher finally spoke, his voice rough but calm. "You planning to stay or keep riding?" His words were not a challenge, more an observation. The woman considered him before answering. Long enough that most men would have grown uneasy. She said she would stay for now. Her voice carried resolve, not comfort. The rancher nodded once, as if that was the only answer he expected. As the day wore on, the town revealed its underbelly. A pair of men watched her from the shade near the saloon, their eyes sharp and unkind. One spat into the dust and laughed low. They knew something she did not, or perhaps they believed they did. The rancher noticed them too. His hand rested near his belt, not threatening but ready. The woman felt the weight of those eyes and adjusted her coat, stepping closer to the stable where she could see the rancher from the corner of her vision. By midday the heat pressed down hard, forcing the town into stillness. The mine loomed larger now, the sunlight failing to soften its edges. The woman found herself walking its direction, drawn by questions she had not yet spoken. She stopped at the edge of town where warning signs leaned crooked and broken. The ground here felt wrong, hollow. Beneath her boots she could almost hear the echo of falling stones and remembered screams carried away by dust. The rancher appeared beside her without sound. He did not ask why she was there. He only said, "The mine takes more than it gives." His eyes never left the dark opening ahead. She replied that some debts demanded payment, even if the cost was life itself. He studied her, then searching for the truth beneath the words. Whatever he found made his jaw tighten. He told her no one goes down there alone and comes back whole. As shadows lengthened, the town gathered itself again. Men drifted toward the saloon, and whispers followed them like ghosts. The two men from earlier spoke with others, their glances cutting toward the woman with open malice. Trouble was no longer a distant possibility. It had arrived and taken a seat. The rancher felt it in the air, heavy and electric, like a storm ready to break. That night the woman sat alone in her room, the lantern casting flickering shapes on the walls. She removed a small worn object from her pocket and held it close, a reminder of why she had come, of why the mine called to her. She did not hear the footsteps outside until it was too late. The door burst open, wood splintering inward, and rough hands dragged her from the room. Her struggle was fierce, but desperation has limits. Outside, the town watched in silence. Fear keeps mouths shut better than threats. The rancher stepped from the shadows, too late to stop them, but not too late to see where they headed. The mine path cut pale under the moon, leading straight into darkness. He stood still for a long moment, then turned back toward the stable. His face showed no anger, only decision. The night swallowed the sound of his horse as he rode hard toward the hills. The land seemed to lean closer, listening, as it always did. Another story was being carved into its bones, one that would echo through Red Hollow long after the dust settled. The ride to the mine cut through the night like a blade, the moon hanging low and pale as if afraid to watch what was about to unfold. The rancher pushed his horse hard yet silent, leaning forward, feeling every shift of muscle beneath the saddle. The land rushed past him, dry grass, stones, shadows stretching and snapping back. The wind carried distant sounds, a muffled laugh, the scrape of boots, and then nothing but the hollow breath of the hills guiding him onward. At the edge of the mine, the men stopped their horses and dragged the woman down from the saddle. Her feet struck the ground hard, but she did not cry out. She had learned long ago that pain spoken aloud only fed cruel hearts. The mine mouth yawned wide before them, breathing cold air that smelled of rust-damped stone and old death. One man lit a lantern, its weak glow barely touching the darkness inside. The others jeered, calling the place her final home. They forced her forward hands, rough voices loud with false courage. The ground sloped sharply and loose gravel shifted beneath her boots. She dug her heels in, fighting every step, but strength alone could not change her fate. They laughed again, and one shoved her hard. She stumbled arms, flailing, and then the earth vanished beneath her feet. Her scream tore free before she could stop it, echoing wildly as her body slammed against the shaft walls. Pain exploded through her side and legs, stealing her breath. The lantern light vanished above, replaced by spinning darkness and falling dust. She struck the bottom hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs and leaving her gasping on the cold stone floor. Above her, the men shouted insults, their voices distant and distorted. One spat down into the shaft, another kicked a loose rock and listened as it clattered and vanished into silence. Then there was the scrape of wood, the sound of a rope being pulled free, and the fading thud of boots retreating. They left her there broken and alone, the mind sealing itself around her like a grave. Time lost meaning in the darkness. She lay still, fighting waves of pain that threatened to drag her under. The air was thick and stale, making each breath a struggle. Her hands found blood slick on her coat, and she clenched her teeth, refusing to give the mind the satisfaction of her despair. Slowly she moved, testing her limbs. Her legs screamed in protest, but held enough to move. Her side burned, yet she lived, and that mattered. She dragged herself toward the wall, seeking support. The stone was cold and damp, seeping through her clothes. She pressed her forehead against it and closed her eyes. Memories rose, unbidden faces, voices, moments that had led her here. Fear clawed at her chest, but beneath it burned a stubborn will. She would not die in the dark, not without a fight. Far above, the rancher reached the mine entrance and dismounted. The air felt wrong. Heavy and weighting, his horse stamped uneasy, refusing to go closer. He tied the reins and stepped toward the mouth, listening. His trained ear caught something faint, carried up from the depths, a sound so small another man might miss it, a breath, a movement, a sign of life. He knelt, touching the ground, fingers brushing loose stones, disturbed by struggle. His jaw tightened. The men had been here recently, and they had not returned alone. He rose and scanned the hills, the town lights flickering far away. He knew going down meant risking everything, yet the choice had already been made. Long before this night, the quiet kind of men do not weigh such decisions aloud. He retrieved rope and lantern from his saddle, checking each knot with care. The flame flickered as he lit it, casting uneasy shadows on the mine walls. He took one last look at the open sky, committing it to memory, then stepped into the darkness, letting the light guide him down. The shaft swallowed him whole, the sounds of the surface fading fast. Below, the woman heard it, a faint scrape of stone and metal. Her heart hammered, hope and fear colliding within her. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to listen. The sound came again, closer, now steady and deliberate. Light flickered far above, a trembling star in the black. Her breath caught. Was it real, or the mind breaking under isolation? The rancher descended, slow and controlled, feeling the rope burn his palms. The walls closed in tight, rough against his shoulders. Dust filled his nose, and the air grew colder. He ignored it, all eyes fixed on the space below, searching for movement. The lantern light finally revealed her shape, crumpled but upright. One hand braced against the stone. He reached the bottom, boots hitting solid ground. He raised the lantern higher, illuminating her face streaked with blood and dirt. Her eyes widened, then narrowed, disbelief warring with exhaustion. He said nothing, only moved closer and held the light steady, letting her see that she was not alone. The mine groaned softly around them, as if angered by his presence. She tried to stand and nearly fell. He caught her arm firm and steady. His grip was strong but careful, a promise without words. She swallowed hard, fighting tears, and nodded once, trusting him with the rest of her strength. Above them, the rope creaked faintly, and somewhere deep within the Mindstone shifted warning of dangers still to come. The darkness had claimed her body, but not her spirit, and now another had willingly stepped into that same darkness, refusing to let it have her without a fight. The lantern light trembled as the mind breathed around them, the walls whispering with shifting stone and old echoes. The rancher tested the rope again, looping it secure around a beam that looked strong enough to argue with fate. He worked with calm precision, every motion earned by years of surviving places that wanted him gone. The woman leaned against the wall, teeth clenched, sweat cold on her skin as pain pulsed through her leg in slow, brutal waves. He wrapped the rope around her, first knotting it firm but gentle, explaining nothing, trusting that she understood. Trust the way frontier souls did. She met his eyes, searching for doubt and finding none, only resolve stood there, hard as iron. She nodded once and braced herself, hands gripping the coarse fibers as he lifted the rope, creaked, protesting. The weight, and the mine answered with a low groan like a warning from a buried giant. Up they moved inch by inch, the rancher pushing and guiding, using his shoulder and strength born of labor. The woman bit back a cry as her injured leg dragged against stone, sparks of pain flashing white behind her eyes. Dust rained down, coating their hair and clothes. The air, thick enough to taste every breath, felt borrowed, every movement felt watched. Halfway up the shaft, a crack split the silence. Timbers above shifted, and a cascade of pebbles rained past them, vanishing into the dark below. The rancher froze, muscles locked, listening. He waited until the mine settled again, then urged her upward with a quiet sound from his throat, not words, just presence. She climbed, pulling herself with shaking arms, refusing to let weakness win. Far above, moonlight brushed the edge of the opening, a pale promise that felt impossibly distant. The woman focused on that light, letting it pull her. Forward, memory by memory, step by step, she thought of the road that led her here, of the wrongs done and the price demanded. She thought of survival and the stubborn fire that had kept her moving across a merciless land. The rancher followed close behind, guarding her ascent, watching the walls and ceiling for signs of betrayal. His revolver rested heavy at his side, a reminder that danger wore many faces tonight. As they climbed, the mine shifted again, louder this time, a deep rumble that rolled through bone and breath alike. He urged her faster, knowing the earth was losing patience. At the mouth of the shaft, hands reached down, grasping her arms, hauling her up, and over the edge she collapsed onto the cold ground, gasping as fresh air burned her lungs like fire. The rancher emerged moments later, rolling clear. As stones spilled after him, the mine shuddered violently, then stilled as if deciding to wait a little longer. They lay there for a heartbeat, neither speaking, listening to the night settle again. Stars watched, indifferent and ancient. The woman laughed, once short and broken, then pressed her face into the dirt, alive beyond expectation. The rancher pushed himself up, scanning the hills, already sensing the next danger before it showed itself. From the trail came the sound of approaching horses, multiple riders moving fast, careless of noise. The men had returned, drawn by greed, or fear, or unfinished cruelty. The rancher pulled her to her feet, supporting her weight without hesitation. He led her toward his horse, tying her secure before turning to face the threat alone if needed. The riders crested the hill, guns raised, voices sharp with anger. The rancher stood, his ground lantern in one hand, revolver in the other light, casting long shadows that made him look taller, broader, unmovable. He did not shout or threaten, he simply waited, and that waiting spoke louder than any challenge. Gunfire shattered the night wood, splintering stone, biting dust, exploding around him. He fired back, measured and true, forcing the men to scatter. One fell, another fled, and the rest hesitated, courage draining fast when faced with a man who refused fear the mine chose. That moment, a roar collapsing inward with a thunder that shook the hills, swallowing the entrance in a cloud of dust and finality. The men broke, then fleeing into the dark, leaving only echoes and regret behind. The rancher mounted quickly, turning the horse toward town, holding her steady as they rode. The land watched again, recording the cost, and the courage etched into its endless memory. Behind them, the mine sealed its secrets forever. Ahead waited reckoning, healing, and a story that would ride the wind across the plains, whispered by fires and remembered by those who understood that in the wild Old West darkness never truly wins when someone dares to follow another into it. Dawn broke hard and red, as if the land itself had been wounded during the night. The rancher rode with steady purpose, the woman held close against the saddle, her breath shallow but strong enough to prove she still belonged to the living. Red Hollow appeared ahead, quiet and tense, its buildings crouched low beneath the rising light as though they sensed what was coming. The dust stirred by the horse hooves felt heavier now, carrying whispers of violence that could no longer be ignored. They reached the edge of town just as doors began to open and faces emerged, pale and uncertain. The woman slid down carefully, her injured leg trembling beneath her. The rancher supported her without ceremony, guiding her toward the sheriff office, though everyone knew the badge in this town carried more rust than authority. Eyes followed them, wide and silent, because people understood when something had shifted, and no one wished to stand in its path. Inside the office, the sheriff stared at them, his face draining of color when he saw the state she was in and the look in the rancher eyes. The woman spoke, then, her voice rough but steady, telling of the mine, the men, the fall, and the darkness. Her words did not seek pity, only truth. The sheriff swallowed hard, knowing the names she would soon speak carried weight and fear in Red Hollow. By the time she finished, the town had gathered outside, drawn by rumor and the heavy pull of justice long delayed. The rancher stood at the door, watching the crowd, reading faces as one reads weather. He saw guilt in some, defiance in others, and shame in many. The men responsible were not among them, yet their absence spoke louder than confession. A murmur rolled through the crowd as the woman stepped out, leaning on the rancher's shoulder. She named them, then, each name falling. Like a hammer blow, the air tightened, as if the land itself demanded response. Some men looked away, others clenched fists, and a few reached for weapons before thinking better of it. Fear is a powerful teacher, and today it taught restraint. From the far side of town, boots thundered as the guilty rode in, guns displayed bravado. Worn thin by night terror, they had not fled far. Believing Red Hollow would shield them as it always had, they shouted accusations, lies, threats, anything to seize control of a story. Already lost? The rancher stepped forward, placing himself between them and the woman, his presence a wall no gunfire wished to test. The first shot rang out sharp and final. The rancher answered without hesitation his movement. Fluid practice, the street erupted into chaos, horses screaming, men diving for cover, dust choking the air. The woman watched from the doorway, heart pounding, knowing this moment had been earned by blood and darkness alike. When the smoke cleared, 2 men lay wounded, 1 dead and the rest fleeing into the open land where the law of survival ruled harder than any badge. The town stood frozen, witnessing a truth they could no longer deny. Silence fell heavy, broken only by labored breaths and the creak of wood settling back into place. The sheriff finally moved, ordering the wounded bound and the dead covered. His voice shook but carried resolve, born too late yet still necessary. The woman sank onto a bench, strength fading now that danger had passed. The rancher knelt beside her, checking her injuries with care as gentle as the night had been cruel. As the sun climbed higher, Red Hollow changed before their eyes. People spoke openly now, apologies offered, quiet and ashamed. The mine outside town had collapsed, sealing away its hunger and the men who fed it with cruelty. The land had closed a wound, though scars would remain as they always do. By afternoon, the woman rested in a clean room, her leg bandaged, her future uncertain. But alive, the rancher stood at the window, watching the horizon where the road stretched endless and unforgiving. She joined him, eventually leaning close, sharing the silence that had saved her life. Words were unnecessary, what mattered had already been proven. When evening came, she asked him what he would do next. He said the same as always, keep moving, keep listening. The West never stopped calling, and neither could he. She nodded, understanding that some people were meant to stay and others to arrive just long enough to change everything. As stars returned to the sky and Red Hollow breathed easier, the story settled into the land, another wild western tale carried by wind and memory, not of a mine or violence alone, but of a quiet rancher who followed someone into darkness and refused to leave her there, and of a woman who survived the fall and stood tall beneath a burning sky that would remember them both. The morning after reckoning arrived, gentle and pale, the kind of dawn that follows a storm when the land exhales and waits to see what survives. Red Hollow woke slower than usual, as if the town itself felt older, wiser, and uncertain of who it had become. Overnight the dust had settled, but the memory had not, and every step along the street carried the echo of what had been faced and what could no longer be ignored. The woman stepped outside, leaning on the doorframe. Feeling the sun warm her face, her legs still ached deep and constant, but it was a living pain, one she welcomed as proof that the darkness had not claimed her. She watched townsfolk move about their business, quieter, now heads lowered, voices softened. Some nodded to her, others looked away, shame heavy in their posture. She did not need their words, survival had already spoken loud enough. The rancher stood by the stable, tightening a strap on his saddle, movements unhurried as ever his horse flicked its tail, restless, sensing the road ahead. He felt her presence before he saw her and turned, meeting her gaze. They shared a look filled with things neither felt the need to explain: gratitude, respect, and the understanding that paths cross for reasons not meant to last forever. She walked toward him, slow but steady, each step a small victory. The town watched again, knowing this was a moment that would live longer than most. The rancher offered his arm and she took it, accepting help without surrendering strength. They stood side by side, facing the open land where the road stretched thin and endless beyond the last building. She spoke first, asking where he would go next. He said nowhere and everywhere, the way men of the West often did. The land called, And he answered when it did. She smiled at that, knowing some souls were never meant to stay rooted. Her own future felt uncertain but no longer empty. The fall had stripped her of fear and left her with purpose she had yet to name. The sheriff approached, removing his hat awkward but sincere. He spoke of justice and change, of how Red Hollow would not forget what had happened. The woman listened politely, then nodded. Once she knew towns made promises easily but kept them rarely. Still something had shifted and that mattered. The rancher listened too, then turned away, his business with the law already finished. By midday the rancher was ready to ride. The woman stood near the road, the dust warm beneath her boots. They spoke little, exchanging only what was needed. He reminded her that the West was wide and unforgiving, but also fair in its own brutal way. She told him she would remember the darkness and the man who did not fear it. He nodded once, that was enough. He mounted his horse, reins loose, posture relaxed, as if the road ahead were just another quiet conversation waiting to happen. He tipped his hat to her then, to the town, not in farewell, but acknowledgement. Then he rode out, slow at first, then steady, becoming smaller against the horizon until land and sky swallowed him whole. The woman watched until he vanished, then turned back toward Red Hollow. The town felt different now, not safer perhaps, but honest. She took a breath and stepped forward, carrying her scars openly, no longer weighed down by them. The mine lay collapsed in the hills, sealed and silent. Its hunger ended at last. The land had taken its due and given back what it chose. That night a fire burned outside the saloon, and stories began to travel as they always do in the West. Some would grow larger, some would fade, but the truth would remain at the core. A woman left to die who refused the grave, a quiet rancher who followed without question, and a darkness that learned even the deepest pits cannot hold what the human will is determined to reclaim. Beyond the horizon, the road continued, waiting for the next story to carve itself into dust and memory, and somewhere between sky and earth, the wild old West listened, ready to remember this one for